So, when we talk about network automation, one important part is always testing, right? So, with network automation, we can achieve great things in short times, but we can also break a lot of things if we are not careful enough. Um, we'll not use the F word. So we need to test, we need to verify, and we should always know in which state is our network. So one thing that we did not discuss yet, who is coming, is the whole single source of truth. So we need a declarative way to describe our infrastructure, but we also need to have a way to test, right? So you all had probably a couple of modules talking about software engineering and testing, right? So who is doing test-driven development? No one? Who is testing the code? Okay, that's good. Who does not need software tests because they know what they are doing? Now, if we are writing software, definitely we have to write tests, especially if we want to touch this code in a couple months again, because otherwise if we have to update the library or anything, especially in Python, if we don't have tests, we have a pretty hard time to get to a point where we know that our work was not interfering with anything we have done in the past. So software engineering, we would talk about unit testing, so just some function testing, if the function is behaving how we expect it, especially with all the edge cases, with exception handling, all the stuff, functional testing, integration testing, and then we would also have usability tests. They can be automated, they can also be by hand. If you have the software engineering project, you probably have to make some usability tests with real people, so you have to talk to persons, to people, maybe, or you have to have a survey or anything. So this is kind of software engineering. So what do we do in the network? Do we have the same thing? Or who has worked in the past in the network area, or let's say service system operator? Any experience? How was the testing? Monitoring systems, yes. After a change. Okay, reactively, yeah, okay. So not really a change window and then a checklist to see if everything works. Okay. Someone else? Who has done at 4 a.m. planned change who did not end up so well as expected? Have you ever been in the situation where you have to decide, should I now invest more time to fix it, or is it easier to try to roll back to the old state and then I have to plan all the stuff again? And if you roll back, how do you know that everything works again? You have to test everything, right? Testing is important, and sometimes there are some stuff that we forget to test. So I had a long time ago testing done at 4 or 5 a.m. after a change who was tough, but in the end we made it through, and then there was not so much energy left to do all the testing perfectly. But the how can I say, people who are using this infrastructure was quite small. We ourselves were using this infrastructure at this time, so the risk was low that there would be something next Monday morning. Everything worked well Monday morning, everything went well Tuesday. After 1 week, the first person said he cannot use the VoIP phone anymore. Thinking, okay, we'll take a look after lunch. And then more and more voice over IP phones did not work anymore. So what happens? Somehow from, let's say, 100 VRFs, one VRF lost the DHCP helper, the IP helper. But all the phones were running, so they had already a DHCP lease. After half of the DHCP lease they wanted to renew, could not reach DHCP, so after the release time was over, the phone was offline. And this is something, how do you find this at 4-5 a.m. if you are not going through each redundant interface configuration on your layer 3 baller to see all this configuration? How would you find this? Okay, was too fast, but this is one of the things, because normally what we do, or what I was used to, I pinged some locations. Can I still reach the internet? Ping 8888. I would be really curious what happens if Google would decide one day we will not respond to ping anymore on this address. I think many would have to change some monitoring or troubleshooting mechanism they have. You send an email, you try to print out your YouTube list, whatever. So we're making some checks. If you are really playing it, you have probably a long checklist. If you are more flexible in your operational work style, you just try some stuff out, you're happy or you're not happy. But to really be sure that everything works again, you definitely have the monitoring system who would kick in if you monitor, but do you monitor IP address helpers? Probably not. So configuration you don't really monitor, and this can then lead to issues later. So what we with testing want to be sure is that we don't have any side effects. So pinging is good. It also can give us some insights if the TTL suddenly changes and we have another path. But to be sure, we need to have something that we can really test the network. Have you seen any network testing frameworks? So the goal today is all the testing frameworks you have not seen yet to know. You don't have to be able to use all of them. So the goal is to know there are testing frameworks, in which areas are they specialized, where could I use them. Maybe there will be at the exam a code snippet and you can say this must be this test framework because it's how it is done. But it's not that you have to master all the tools. You just need to know that they are existing. There are many more. There are many vendors out there. They also have some stuff, but we are focusing more on the open source part. What kind of tests we have? Different tests. Yeah, and then of course the main point is that you know how important testing is. That we really should focusing more on testing. It's not always the fun part. The fun part is to write our non-neo script to automatically deploy all the MPLS services. But if we want to have a solution that works well, we also need to test. So in networking, I would say we have normally 3 different kind of tests. We have unit tests, where we not testing code functions, but features or operational states of devices. So for example, we would check if interface is there, if the IP is correct, maybe something like this. Um, Functional tests, we would see if BGP is up, if we can talk BGP with the other ones. There is the question, when do we go from unit test functional tests to integration tests? Integrational tests would be the more to see, does the whole system work? So for example, we could deploy some Raspberry Pis in our network somewhere, and then we could make a DHCP ping. That's also a tool available on Linux, where we can see, can I still get a DHCP IP address in this network? We can ping, we can JPerf for performance measurement. If we would do integration tests with performance, we have to be aware that this should not be done at rush hour, because this will infect our network. So these tests, we have to be a little careful, and we cannot run them in parallel as well. But that's the kind of tests we can definitely do, not so hard to implement. And the third one is more like static. We can also have some configuration analysis. So there are tools, this case then Batfish, who can take different configurations and see if BGP, for example, is configured in both ways. Yes. So the question is, how do I do unit tests? If I do it with PyTest or which framework? And the answer is, it depends. No, there is more than one tool. So we could do unit tests in the traditional software style with PyTest, right? I can write a PyTest function. I can say this test connect to this device, make show version, and check if the version of this device is the version I expecting. So I can write this pure Python with PyTest. There I can use libraries like Nonny, Netmiko, Scapy, yeah, all the stuff, but I have to do everything by myself. That is definitely one option. There is another project, Anta, that's also Python framework, who helps writing this test, has already some test functions. Then there is a tool called Nuts, because network testing can really drive you nuts. So that's my favorite tool, but I'm a little biased on this one. Then there is Ondatra, I guess, not sure how you pronounce that, who is OpenConfig. So if you anyway are into Go, this would be a nice way to start testing if you use gRPCs to communicate with your devices, but you can also have the legacy communication to devices. Then PyATS, that's from Cisco, is huge. We have already seen it in the screenscaping with the Genie. So PyATS is the whole framework where we can have test beds and make snapshots from the device, and after the change, after the iOS upgrade, we can make another snapshot and see if is there any difference. So, and we can also write tests. Then there is a robot framework. It's a framework similar to PyTest for testing automation. It's normally used in integration tests, where we, for example, also have to fill out web forms and see if something changes. There is possibility. Some tools also have integration, and then we have Batfish for static configuration analysis. There are just a few of them. There are much more, so I cannot cover all of them. I just have a list here. We will go through them. They all have their benefits or drawbacks. In the end, we have to know which tool fits well in our tool stack. So if you, for example, anyway working with Nonny, maybe a test framework who can deal with the Nonny inventory would be nice. There is also the question how much of the tests you want to generate or how much do you want to have static. You can generate tests like I have my single source of truth, and from here I define I need to have version 17.9, and this test would check this. If I have a mistake in the definition here, I would check the wrong thing. So maybe it's easier if we copy it hard coded and to be sure. Yes. Okay, let me try to uh, to rephrase it correctly. So in our example, we had service provisioning with YAMLs where we deploy code snippets, and your question is now, how do I verify that the correct code snippets are deployed on the box with Badfish? That's the question. So Badfish itself, it's focusing on static configurations. So if you want to use Badfish in this case, you would generate the whole configuration of multiple devices, and Badfish would then tell you the BGP configuration on this side and this side does not match. You have here an address family for BGP, VRF, something, and here you don't have it. This is a mismatch. So that would be more a static check for semantic of your configuration. Another thing would be to write tests. When you deploy something, you also write tests and say, I want to check this. If I have a new service at edge A and C, I want to have a ping from C to A that is working. So that I would separate the tests from the non-neo deployment tasks. You can use the same inventory maybe, but I would recommend to write the tests manually, because otherwise if you have any issues with your logic and you generate the wrong configuration, you also generate the wrong test. So if you auto-generate tests with the same kind of logic you generate the configuration, there is a high chance that you're not testing the right thing in the end, and you will not know it before it is gone. Yes, I would recommend even generate it from the same single source of truth, from the same inventory, or do it completely handwritten. So like you open a file and say, and I want to be able from here to here to have testing, just to have it similar to versioning pinning, that you really know this is what I need. Testing, it's always, there is a, yeah, it's nice to generate some tests. So for example, I can generate tests for checking all the loopbacks connectivity, but if I somehow in this logic miss one device, I will not test it, and everything will be green, because all the ones I generated, I tested. So to avoid this kind of stuff, sometimes it's easier to just have a little more verbose testing files with copy pasting maybe, but then you really know what is there. Make sense? So PyTest you know from the Python module, hopefully. So just de facto standard Python library for testing, Python code, and if we use it, why not also use it for infrastructure testing? It's quite flexible, there are many plugins. And another thing would be then this Arista Network Test Automation Framework, ANTA. That's a Python library. It's focusing, of course, for Arista. So if you have Arista devices, could be a good option. In the end, you have a CLI tool, and you can define your tests. There are a set of tests available. For example, you can check if a VLAN is. You can say, I want to have this test YAML. Start VLAN ID for the policy. If we have a VLAN policy, yeah. So there is some ways we can define this. We can also extend it. That's one of the libraries. So if you're using Arista only, that's definitely one tool you can look. It should also be possible to use for other vendors as well. Yeah. What I also have seen a lot is testing with Ansible. That's definitely not my favorite way to do it, but you can also use Ansible or another tool for some testing. So you have all the flexibilities. So NUTS, as I said, I'm kind of biased on this one. It started as a bachelor thesis here. So some colleagues long time ago have developed the first version. It used salt stack. Then there was a huge refactoring later with PyTest. So now it is a PyTest plugin. So if you use PyTest, you can just install this plugin, and you can use the tests from this plugin. You can also write your own test cases. My opinion, a really nice tool, I have to say it, because I'm kind of the maintainer of it. So yeah, so it has, let's see, it has not completely 100 stars, so maybe afterwards if you all put the star button, no. There is a documentation also somewhere, but in the end it is a PyTest plugin where we can generate YAML files, the test bundles, and this will be then transformed into non-linear tests. So you can define, I want to go to all my nodes and make a show switch port, for example, and the test itself will also then take care of executing it in parallel, gathering the data, and then give it to PyTest, that we have all the reporting tools. If we generate JUnit XML, we can use this report in another tool. We can combine it in our CI/CD pipeline if we want. We can also run the tests on different environments, and the test itself, let's say, for example, CDP neighbor, Cisco discovery protocol. We can say, on this device I expect to see the neighbor router 1 on the interface gigabit 3. On the other side it needs to be R2, and it has this management IP, and with this kind of YAML file we can then test that, for example, the layer 2 is still up, right? Or we can also check for BGP neighbors, all this stuff. If you want to try it out, in this organization here, there is beautiful picture how it would look with all the tests, and there is this Container Lab demo. So if you have Container Lab, you can spin up a network with, I think here I used Nokia devices. Yeah, Nokia SR Linux. You can spin them up, and then you can run the tests. And tests, we have simple non-new inventory, but we can also use another inventory plugin. And we have tests like LLDP, neighbors. And here I use tags and groups. That's kind of a new feature where we can say on all the devices with this tag, or on all devices in this group, if we have them in the inventory correctly, I want to make this test. If the issue is, if this group is empty because I messed up the inventory, this test will execute against 0 devices. So maybe it's easier and just hard code on host, leave 1, leave 2, I want to execute this. So that's kind of, I'm lazy to write files, or I'm lazy to copy stuff. I think if we really need to be aware that this works, it is the safer approach to not use this unfolding feature for device grouping and just make it hard-coded manually. Yeah. I will also send you the link. If you have Container Lab on your computer running, you can just run the whole topology, and then it will be, yeah, you have a Linux container where you can execute the lab. So Container Lab deploy, and then it will run, and the setup does all the installation later. And if we would, for example, change the speed, we can also check this. There are more or less demo test cases, but it's easy to write their own cases in Python if you are familiar with Python and Nonia. Questions? The question is where we run connectivity tests. This depends on your infrastructure. So one way would be, of course, from the router or from your network device from the VRF. So you can go to your edge router and say, I want to have a ping from VRF customer B to this and this IP address. This is one way to do it. Another way is many network devices, they allow nowadays to run Docker containers or a Linux container in the box itself. So we could start up a gas shell and make some tests from there. Another approach I have seen for huge networks is that they physically put probes in the network. Could be a Raspberry Pi, where you connect it somewhere to your access switches in the campus, for example, and then you can run tests from there. If you are in a data center, you can spin up VMs, run tests, and then spin them, tear them down. There are also some tools, also in NUTS, for example, the JPerf test allows you to have a setup command, so you could change the interface configuration to be in another VRF and then make tests, so you don't have to have for each VLAN, for example, a lone device. But it really depends on your infrastructure. The easiest is most of the time from the device itself, from the VRF context. Yeah. So, then we have the Open Network Device Automated Test Runner and API. That is from OpenConfig, so if you remember, the organization who really is also driving the progress in gRPC, GNMI, all this stuff with Go and Yang models, and this is written in Go. You kind of have to write protobuf similar test cases for your testing. There should be some there. Let's take the tour. Oh, new presentation. there must be an example how we defined. We can send configuration. We can send it for Arista and Cisco, different configurations to be vendor agnostic. And yeah, so this in this Golang syntax we can write tests, we can use streaming telemetry to get information, all this stuff. So if you are ending up using Golang for your network automation project, maybe this testing framework would be a good start for you, because you have the same tooling, all the stuff. If you use Yang, definitely nice to have the same tool stack, right? Yeah, so we can use GNOI or however you pronounce it, and you can send a ping to the destination 8888 as an example. So that would be an easy test. And here you have to write your Golang code, but you're also pretty flexible how to deal with the tests, what you want to test, how you want to test it. So, PyATS, not sure if I mentioned it in the screenscaping lecture, is coming from Cisco internally. They developed this whole thing for testing their equipment. So if they make changes, we can kind of verify if the device still behaves the same. It is feature rich. In my opinion, it is too big and too much focusing on release testing. But you can also write your own tests. You have web UI. You can add to it. There are definitely videos. We were considering this for one project to verify if a migration of an edge router to a new device worked well. So we were thinking of using PyATS to make a snapshot with all the protocol features we use. Then we replace it with a new model, another, I think it was from XE to XR, if I'm not mistaken, and then make the snapshot again. We should get the same structured data because of Genie and the internal data models, and then we can say if we have the same operational state. This definitely is doable with PyATS. The thing was we would have to exclude a lot of information because it is extremely rich on information you get. On BGP neighbors, you get, for example, the number of memory it needs, this neighborship. And of course, if you have a device running with a BGP neighborship on one platform for years and then you migrate it to a new platform, this number will never be the same. So we will have to exclude a lot of information for our diff. And in the end, it was easier to just write a couple of netmiko show commands with text FSM or TTP to get exactly the data we wanted to have and make a diff over. So it's a huge tool. It's a good tool. There is recently a book who was released, I think a month ago, from Cisco Press, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely, I don't want to say it's a bad tool. I just want to say it's big. So if you want to go with this, if you have, it also works with other vendors, but definitely the best with Cisco. You have to get you some time to get into all the feature it has, and then you have to maybe exclude some information, because I think for BGP snapshot it makes over 100 show commands to get all to collect the data. So it's also not the fastest tool. If it's really time critical, I'm not sure if you test after a migration. But yeah, if you think about 100 show commands and then parsing this all, it's a huge amount of data you get just from one device. So yeah, it is powerful. If you want to make the DevNet expert, so kind of the CCIE for NetDev, you need to know this tool pretty well. You have to write tests as the exam, but yeah, just if you are interested in it, give you a couple of days to play around to get the feeling how big this tool is. So in my opinion, probably the biggest tool on this list. But most of the code is open source released, so that's also nice. And as we have seen, we can use the Genie part for getting structural data from show commands. So, one thing is this robot framework. We will also see this in network automation and testing a lot. One big thing that is nice is the reporting. So if you need to provide really detailed reporting, how you have done the tests, which one was when failing, maybe robot framework is better than PyTest, because PyTest is more focusing on unit testing. Robot framework, I would say, is more for integration testing. We can kind of describe tests in a text base. I can write tests in the way like login on localhost and enter username, test password, test123, and click submit. Of course, in the background we need to have the Python code who can translate to test cases, but this is how we use the framework for testing. So if you have some, I think the Celium is the library behind, who would then make the screenscaping of the web page and enter the data. Definitely if you need to make some tests, this can be nice. So yeah, here is an example. Can I make the page go? Yeah. Whoa. So we can write a test case. We can say connect to server. Then we have to define the server somewhere. Somewhere we have a setting file for the server. Then log in with user and password, verify, and then it will look if there is this text somewhere on this web page. So we can also use the same thing for network testing. For example, for PyATS, there is an integration in Robo Framework, so we can use the Robo Framework to trigger PyATS tests and run them. We can use this kind of style to say login on device router 10 and make show IP interface brief, and then there should be the IP address, let's say 10.10.10.10. So this kind of tests we can also write here. It looks in the beginning easy, in my opinion, but if you then want to make advanced tests, it is not so flexible. You have to end up to write your own implementation for the keywords behind, because this is then translated to Python functions with the arguments. But one thing that is definitely a big plus, in my opinion, is the reporting. It's also written in Python, so for integration tests, also for SSH, it has a lot of features there, but you have to see which one you need. I have seen some projects starting with Robo Framework, making a lot of progress in the beginning, and then at one point there was the decision to just move everything to PyTest. It really depends how important for you the reports and the logging is. There are many PyTest reporting plugins as well, so you can have a web page generated by PyTest where you can see all the test cases, where you can see the details, how long was this test running, but in the end it depends what you need. right? Um, Testing. There are some testing frameworks on higher level software where you then can feed in results from different tools. So if you then end up into have testing releases and all this stuff, now it's a even bigger topic. But then we have not only network testing, then we have the whole infrastructure we have to test and validate. Yeah, so here we will only talk about the easy, simple network automation that we can really control by ourselves, and also have the flexibility and use it for our needs. So in my opinion, this testing here, the main purpose should be that it makes our life easier, that we know the network is exactly in the state I'm expecting it. Depending on the automation I use, if I use a reconsideration loop kind of thing where I just deploy always the right state on the device, then of course I have to adapt my testing, because I kind of know that my desired state is always deployed, but not many infrastructures can do this from the beginning. So we have to also be aware that we have some networks that not always are exactly how we expect it. And yeah, the last tool here is this Bedfish with a beautiful logo. I think it's written in Java if I'm not mistaken, but there is also a Python SDK for it. And yeah, there are some tutorials where you can then really check if the routing configuration makes sense, if the access control lists are making sense. It has a lot of implementation for checking this kind of tests. Yeah. Forwarding, if there are loops or not, all this kind of static configuration analytics we can do here. You will find here a lot of blog posts how to use it, so that's definitely something you can go through it. And there is a matter of time until Bedfish or another tool will then use AI to also detect some patterns. I'm not sure if there is already something out, or yeah, but it's a matter of time. Of course, you can also use ChatGPT if you trust it. Yeah, so these are the kind of network testing I see the most. One other thing, of course, is compliance checks. There are also many tools out there who can do that, but if we have network testing, we can also combine it to have compliance checks. If there is a new issue out and we need to be sure that all the HTTPS servers on the network devices are turned off, we could also write a test, and then it is in the test suite, and next time we run all the tests, we test this as well. So in my opinion, the network test is similar to the software tests. We have to develop them when we are developing our solution, our network, and they will grow. In the end, we will have many tests. We start maybe small, but every time something breaks, we have to write a new test because we did not detect it. So, does that make sense? Who goes now home and writes network test? Bedfish is nice to try, definitely. I personally like Python and therefore PyTest, so most flexible for me, but Bedfish has definitely some features that I don't want to implement by myself. Does not make sense to implement all the logic for semantic tests of configuration. Yeah. Any questions? Okay, Thank you.